So I'm joined this evening by Senate President Malcolm Smith. He is kind enough to join me here in Niagara Falls at the Democratic Rural Conference Straw Poll. Malcolm, how are you? Nice to see you.
Very well. Good
so how was that
you.
trip? That's quite a trip.
The trip was fine, but I was coming here to see you as well.
I don't
You're
think
doing this
so.
great job for YNA, and I had to be a part of it.
Well, thank you very much for coming.
Well, thank you.
I understand that you have a favorite in the AG race, and it's your colleague, Eric Schneiderman.
Yep.
So he's from New York City.
Right.
This is a Democratic Rural Conference straw poll, so how do you think he's going to fare?
I think he'll fare well. I mean, the Rural Conference run by Irene Steiner, she is a very fair-minded person. And as you recall, when we were looking to take over the majority in 2008, our theme was One New York. And I think everybody got that, and they still get that now. So Eric, what he stands for will translate to upstate New York, downstate, middle of New York. I mean, it's all one area.
Do you think, though, that the bulk of the primary vote actually comes out of New York City? And this obviously is an upstate event, but if one does not fare well here, do you think one can still do well when it comes September?
Well, I've heard people talk about downstate being sort of the bulk of it, but I don't subscribe to that. I think the entire state matters. I think Senator Snyder knows that, and I think that he is going to be moving around the entire state. I think times have changed. I think the electorate is not only smarter, but they're more active and more involved. So I could potentially see the upstate vote being just as critical and just as the same amount as the vote in the city.
Really? But the ideologies, a little more conservative, maybe upstate. Also, the needs are so different. I mean, certainly.
Well, they were not that different. I mean, if you're talking about from a government standpoint, I mean, everybody wants children educated. Everybody wants to be publicly safe. Everybody wants a job. And these are things that, even though the AG does a little bit different on those matters, he has an impact, whether he's suing a company for not faring well with using the tax dollars that we may give them, or if he's talking about public safety. So I think the translation will be pretty fair across the state.
So now, what we're not going to see here today, this is a statewide contest, and obviously the Senate is hanging in the balance. Again, there's going to be a battle for the control of the chamber. And this area was actually not Niagara Falls, but Buffalo was a battleground for you guys. You can't really control the chamber in a serious way unless you do well upstate and in the suburbs.
Right. Well, I anticipate we'll pick up about 5 seats.
You believe that?
Yeah. I mean, we've got Vinnie Libel, who's not running anymore. We've got Moorhan, who I think is a good seat for us. Ken LaValle, out on Long Island, pretty good. We got Patterson, Hannon, and we've got at least 12 or 13 candidates that are in the field now.
Well, we learned yesterday, but then this morning it was official that Dale Volcker is not going to run. Are you guys going to make a push for that seat?
Well, we obviously you can't leave a vacant seat, and we'll make a push for it, but that's not one of our major targets. We have a very strategic plan. We're going after it. We're focused on it, and I think the people are pretty smart. They're not going to, put their hands of the future of this state back into the same people who basically got us into this mess. No matter what, the people in New York are very smart. They are not going to entrust the future to the same people that got us in this mess, and I think they'll keep the Senate as a Democrats.
To be fair, the last 18 months or so that the Democrats have been in power has been pretty chaotic in Albany. You had the coup. You yourself were at the time majority leader and Senate president. Now just Senate president. We have a majority leader, Pedro Espada. He is in a lot of trouble, actually. The way that vote came down, you appointed him, which means you can unappoint him, and there doesn't have to be a vote to get rid of him. So how do you feel about that?
Well, what we did was the members in our conference, we spoke about who that appointment would be. So obviously, if they're members of the conference who want to change that appointment, that's something I'd have to respond to.
Has there been a discussion about that?
No, members have talked about it individually. Not a groundswell have come to me and said anything about it. I mean, Pedro Espada has his challenges. I'm sure his lawyers will deal with it. But at this point, we're focused on trying to get that budget done.
Right.
As you know.
And we will turn to that in just a second.
Yeah.
But is the conference going to support Pedro Espada against its Desiree Pilgrim Hunter as his primary challenger?
Well, first of all, we always support our incumbents. I don't know what will happen to Pedro Espada in terms of the future, but as a rule for the Senate, we support the incumbents.
So that would actually mean that you would, in fact, support Pedro Espada, assuming that he's not convicted in between now and then.
As a rule, we support the incumbent senators.
Right.
He's an incumbent senator right now.
Right. So support does that mean financially or just sort of optically we support you?
It varies. I mean, some members need to have resources. Some members need to have just known that they're being supported by the Congress members. Sometimes they want somebody there. I mean, it depends on what their needs are.
Okay, let's talk about that budget because it is, of course, a major issue for everyone, and upstate, downstate, and every point in between. No movement, actually, anywhere.
Well, actually there is movement. Movement happens every day. It's sort of incremental. Obviously, we're not making major strides, but clearly we have some lines that are drawn. We want to make sure property taxes are in this budget. That is
Right.
critical to the people around the state
And
of
you're
New York.
not moving off that.
And some people will say to us, well, how can you do that with a deficit? But remember, these are challenging times. A lot of people have lost their jobs, in particular in upstate New York. They need some relief. Property tax will help that. We want to make sure that we have jobs. I mean, we did the Power for Jobs, that Dow overtime push, saved 400 and created close to 400,000 jobs across the state. However, we still got to make sure this budget does create jobs, and clearly we got to control some spending.
Okay, but
Assembly wants to spend money; they want to borrow.
Well, right. Actually, it depends on how you define borrowing, because to re-securitize tobacco bonds, one would argue, is also borrowing, and that's a proposal that the Senate Democrats have made. It's not embracing the Ravitch proposal necessarily for borrowing, the Lieutenant Governor's proposal,
Right.
which the governor has subsequently panned.
Right.
But the governor has made it clear that he doesn't intend to do anything that includes borrowing. You've made it clear, the Senate Democrats, that you're going to stay with property taxes and you're going to be very firm on that.
Right.
And the Assembly is very firm in its position on restoring spending cuts to education and healthcare, et cetera. Where is the movement or the middle ground, if you will, to get an agreement in that?
Well, think about it. The governor just announced that he found another $621 million in cuts. We've been telling him he needs to find more cuts. So we think there's movement. It takes a little time. This is my third budget. I negotiated the minority, the majority, and then the majority again. And I know it takes some time. Sometimes it's a chicken and an egg. Sometimes who blinks first. But that's the nature of what happens. And I think the staffs are talking, and we'll get there.
Let me just ask you a final question that I should have probably asked earlier. Are you running for re-election?
Yes.
You are.
Yes.
And you expect to be, there's been some negative press up to this point. You are not concerned about that?
No, I think this is the big leagues. When you're in the big leagues, you got to expect it. So that's why I try to keep a clean life.
And you're not concerned, feeling good?
Oh, yeah, I feel good. I'm happy to be up here at DRC. This is where you have to be. In order to become any kind of elected official in the state of New York, you got to come to this conference.
Okay. Thank you very much, Malcolm
All righty.
Smith. I appreciate it. Senate President Malcolm
Thank you.
Smith, thanks for joining us.
Good